charged devices. Sometimes you something's loose.
You gotta play around.
We are on 14B2, and the court is giving us some issues. So assuming everything goes well, we'll continue like this. If not, I'll have to stitch together two things and become a video editor yet again. All right, let's begin. So what we've been covering up until now is we have a Mishnah. Oh yes. Is that we have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah tells us about all these different items that are part of the people who get Makkot. And we explained that those people who get lashes are not exclusive. It's not an exclusive list. There's other people that are on the list also that get Makkot. The only difference is that each one of the cases listed in the Mishnah is a case you might have thought does not have Makkot. Why? Because it has another punishment. So we've discussed the various opinions on that, and up until now, we brought all the ideas and all the concepts as to what constitutes one of those cases and whatnot. So now, the Gemara is moving on to the next segment in the Mishnah, and it's teaching us now where do we learn those alternate ideas of the Mishnah from, that a person could get some other punishment but also get karet. Okay, so the Gemara says, "V'tameh she'achal et hakodesh," and a tameh that eats from food that is kodesh. So in other words, what kind of food is kodesh? Food from the korban. Okay, says the Gemara, I understand that when someone enters into the space of the Mikdash Tameh, this is very, very relevant, because they're fighting right now in the news about Ben Gvir. I don't know if you read about this. What did he do? He went to Temple Mount on Tisha B'Av with a bunch of people. So everyone went nuts. What are you doing? How could you do that? You're flaring, you're escalating tensions, la la la. Okay? My point is not to discuss whether they're right or wrong, la la la. I'm not talking about that. The she'elah is, are you allowed to go on Temple Mount when all of us are tameh? According to many opinions, that's an isur karet. Bye. Abos. So the rabbis signed that that the Jews should not go on the Temple Mount, Orthodox rabbis, because most opinions hold that that's not only forbidden but punishable by the death penalty. Ooh. Right? So people don't know. They're like, oh, I had a guy hook up. And we love that, right? The guy got me in. The guy got you in. The guy's the executioner. Okay. If a person comes to the Mikdash when he's tameh, we know that has karet. Why? K'tiv onesh v'k'tiv azhara. As we said already numerous times, you need two things. You need onesh and you need azhara. Onesh is that the Torah says, if you did this, this is the punishment. But you also need to be told somewhere, thou shalt not do this. That's azhara, okay? So you have one of each of those things. Says the Gemara, onesh dichtiv. Onesh, where do we find the onesh of someone who's tameh, who goes on to the harabait? It mishkan amonai timeh v'nichreta. It says about this person that if a person goes onto the mishkan of Hashem, v'nichreta, he gets karet. Azhara, where do we find that you're not allowed to do so? Pasuk says, v'lo yitamu et mahanehem. He shall not defile the mahaneh, the camp, the encampment. Okay? Ela, so we have a onesh, we have a punishment, and we have a warning. Ela tameh she'achal et hakodesh. But someone who's tameh, who ate food that was kodesh, how do we know? Bishlema onesh ketiv. We have a pasuk that says the punishment. We found that pasuk. Why? Because it says v'anefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashelamim asher laHashem. Person who eats from the flesh of a korban shelamim v'tum'ato alav, and his tumah is on him. V'nichreta. So we have an explicit pasuk telling us that a person who's tameh, who eats from a korban, from kodesh, he gets karet. That we have explicitly. Ela azhara minayin. Where do you find the warning for such a thing? The Gemara says as follows: Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yohanan. Rish Lakish says, the pasuk says when a woman gives birth to a child, we know that post childbirth a woman has tum'ah. How much tum'ah depends for a boy, for a girl. However, we know there's a period of tum'ah. Says the Gemara, during that period of tum'ah, b'chol kodesh, shuf. Kodesh lo tiga. Kodesh lo tiga. And anything which is holy, you should not touch. So therefore, he sees clearly that if you can't touch the food, at least here there's an assumption, you can't touch it, you can't eat it, right? Okay. Rabbi Yohanan says, Tani Bardela used to say, Atya tum'ato. We learn from, now this is tricky, we learn tum'ato gzera shava, that the word is used twice. Once, where do we find tum'ato? By, remember, what do we have? We have that if a person who's tameh, who eats from the kodesh, it says that he gets tameh, right? To karet, from zevach hashelamim. So the word says tumato. But when the Torah is telling us about a person who enters onto Harabait, which the Gemara says that we already have a pasuk for, it also uses that word tumato. So in other words, what I'm going to do is, I have a punishment. You want to know where my warning is? I got my warning, I borrowed it from the other avon through Gzera Shava. Got it? Tumato. Even though that warning is by something else, but the Gzera Shava gives me the warning from that other place, because it tells me, if you warned for that, you warned for this. Okay? Now, that sounds like a crazy item, but the truth is, so much of Torah is like that. We learn out that something's asur from Gzera Shava. That means that we learned out that onesh, or the azara from Gzera Shava. So if you could learn it to give you a sin, surely you could learn it just so that you have a verse of the sin. Right? Okay, that's Rabbi Yohanan. That's how Rabbi Yohanan learns it. Ma lehalan, ktiv hachav tumato alav v'nichreta. Ktiv hatam tameye o tumato bo. It says over here, tumato. It says over there, tumato. So we bring the onesh, we bring the azara from walking tameh onto Harabait to eating kodesh tameh. Afkan, just like over there, just like over there it has a warning and a punishment. Afkan, onesh v'azara. Also over here, we have a onesh now and an azara. The Gemara now says, 1 second, why does each opinion not rely on the other one? How come Rish Lakish, who used this idea of touching, that we have a pasuk that says you can't touch the food, how come Yohanan didn't like that? And how come Rish Lakish didn't like the opinion of Yohanan of Gzera Shava? The Gemara says, hold on. Bishlema, Rish Lakish lo amar Yohanan. I get that Rish Lakish does not like Rabbi Yohanan. You know why? Gzera Shava lo gamir. Gzera Shava, I can't decide, it says over here Bereshit, it says over there Bereshit. Now you're not allowed to work on a Tuesday. Right? You can't make up your own Gzera Shava. It has to be something that came down in the body of Misorah from your rabbi and his rabbi all the way back to Har Sinai. Had to have been given at Mount Sinai. So Resh Lakish, he didn't have such a Gzera Shava. So whenever you ask him, you want to know why I don't hold a Gzera Shava? I never received it from my rabbi. This is very curious, and no one talks about this. Why?
Nobody talks about it.
I did not see anyone that deals with this issue. Okay? Why? Because who's Resh Lakish's rabbi?
Rabbi Yochanan?
I read this Gemara, I was like, what is happening? Yeah. How could the Gemara say he didn't receive him as rabbi? This is his rabbi. And his rabbi is obviously did have a Misorah. So now the rabbi is telling him, this is what I hold. I don't have that. I don't know what that is. I'm telling you what that is. I'm your rabbi. Isn't that fascinating? Mm-hmm. I would have thought that would have been something everybody would deal with. I'm sure I'll be able to find something later. Bezrat Hashem. I'll come back to you on that. Either way, the Gemara says Rish Lakish did not have the Gzera Shava. Therefore, he's stuck without it. Rabbi Yohanan, how come Rabbi Yohanan didn't follow the opinion of Rish Lakish, where he draws it from the fact that you can't touch, there's a pasuk that says that you're not allowed to touch Kodesh when you're not holy. When you're tameh, excuse me. Yochanan says, that pasuk is actually not talking about kodesh. It's not talking about the meat of a korban. It's talking about terumah. Okay? And since it's talking about terumah, so you can't learn that there's a warning to all kodesh, all the meat of korbanot. The Gemara says, oh my gosh, if Rabbi Yochanan could shove that pasuk, body check it out of kodesh and into tiruma, so we now left without a pasuk telling us that it's asur. Resh Lakish asara tiruma minale. 1 second, I don't understand, right? If that's the case, where does Resh Lakish now, who learns it for kodesh, right? Where does he learn that tiruma is not allowed to be touched with whilst the person is tameh? The Gemara says, Nafkale, he learns that from another pasuk. Ish mizera Aharon. It's very interesting language. A man, any person, okay, ish means like any person. Mizera Aharon. What does that word mean? Mizera Aharon.
It's really Kohanim, isn't it?
Yeah, but what does the word mean literally?
Seed of
from
Aharon.
The seed of Aharon. It doesn't say, what does it normally say? Let's go back to Birkat Kohanim. Daber el Aharon banav lemor. What does it say here?
Just
the
Aharon.
Seed of Aharon. What do you notice immediately between the difference between what I just mentioned to you about Birkat Kohanim and here?
It's direct versus indirect.
Number one, direct versus indirect. What else would be a difference between the sons of Aharon and the seed of Aharon?
The seed could be the daughters.
Nailed it. Seed could be the daughters. So the seed takes a much more wide angle lens and says anyone that comes from Aharon. By the way, what's the halacha with regards to that? There's certain korbanot that a kohenet, a female kohen, does not get to eat. Like kodesh kodashim are not for, the women don't eat it. Okay? So there's certain things that a woman that it's only for bnei Aharon. And there's certain things for the benot Aharon. But this is zera Aharon, everyone. What food are all kohanim, male, female, all able to eat? Even if, by the way, let's say this girl, she marries somebody, is Israel. Does she get to eat now? A kohenet that marries Israel, now her father has teruma around the house. Is she allowed to eat it? No. She's married to Israel, she's now Israel. But if she gets divorced, or if her husband passes away, she reverts back to that status. Why? Because it was Zera Aharon. So therefore, Resh Lakish says, I have a pasuk that I know must be referring to Teruma. So therefore, I'll use that pasuk to tell me, that if the pasuk over there says, if the person who's trying to eat the Teruma is tameh for whatever reason, they're not allowed to eat it. So therefore, which food is relevant to all of the seed of Aharon? That refers to teruma. So therefore, Rish Lakish has a pasuk for teruma. What is he going to use this one for? He's going to use this one to tell him about all sacrificial foods. Rabbi Yohanan doesn't learn it for that. He pushes it to something else. V'idach, the Gemara says, 1 second. Rabbi Yohanan, you learned this idea of teruma from the pasuk that we meant that Rabbi Yohanan, that Rabbi Resh Lakish learned it from. Remember? Resh Lakish's pasuk says that when a woman after her pregnancy, she's not allowed to touch food. He learns that to tell you sacrificial foods. You did not want to use it for that. You said that was teruma. Okay, fine. But now you have another pasuk which must be referring to teruma. He says, Hahu la'achila. That pasuk tells you that she's not allowed to eat the teruma. And this tells you they're not even allowed to touch it. Now, I want to just draw your attention to the Pisukim. Take a look in the inside column over there. You see it? It's the second one. Second one, no. The fourth one. Dalet. You see it in the inside column? Person eats. Okay? Asher tochal basar. We know that the person gets karet from that pasuk. Now the question is, what about these other pasukim? Look at the next one. Ushloshim u'shlosh yamim. That's talking about a woman after her pregnancy. 33 days. Teshevet me ta'ora. B'chol kodesh lo tiga. She's not allowed to lo tiga. She can't touch it. And the mikdash lo tavod. She can't enter the Beit HaMikdash. Ad melot yimei ta'ora. Now, let's look at the other pasuk, the pasuk that Resh Lakish, that Rabbi Yohanan is now having to deal with. Ish mizer Yaakov, mizer Aaron, v'u tzarua ozav, b'kodashim lo yochal. He cannot eat kodashim, ad asher yitar. V'hanogeya bechol tameh nefesh, or ish asher tetzeh mem shechvat zera. Right? So it seems in the same pasuk, we deal with eating and touching. Okay? So one pasuk tells you can't touch. One pasuk adds to the touching the isur of eating. Okay? So the Gemara answers, okay? So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says that's why I need both Pesukim to come to tell you that idea. So Resh Lakish, that has one pasuk for terumah and one pasuk for kodashim, where he doesn't have an extra pasuk to tell you about touching, right? Right? What does he do? Right? There's this, when we're looking at this pasuk, right, that you can't touch it, right? What's it coming to tell you? Right? He learns that this pasuk is required, right, for a tameh that touches kodesh as well. That's how Yohanan, that's how Resh Lakish learns this extra pasuk. The itmar, because we learned tameh shenaga b'kodesh, Resh Lakish amar lokeh. If a person whose tameh touches food that's from a korban, Resh Lakish says lokeh. Yohanan omer en lokeh. Yohanan says no, you don't get malkut. Resh Lakish omer lokeh. Why? B'chol kodesh lo tiga. Because he uses this pasuk to tell us that you can't even touch food from a korban. So Rabbi Yochanan winds up only left over with a pasuk about touching terumah. So only terumah does Rabbi Yochanan say you get malkut. Resh Lakish learns that if you touch kodashim, if you touch a korban, meat and your tameh, you get malkut. Not even eat it, even if you just touch it. Okay? So, if that's the case, ask the Gemara. Now that Rabbi Yochanan learns this pasuk of Bachol Kodesh Lo Tiga, Rabbi Yochanan learns that you're not allowed to touch even the food of a korban. Okay, so how is he also going to use that to refer to eating? If you use it to tell me touching, then you don't know that you're allowed to eat it. The Gemara answers, Tameh shenaga b'kodesh. The pasuk is telling you that a tameh that touches kodesh, from the fact that Torah says it in a language of touching, azhara le'ochel. Right? We also learn. That's how we learn touching. How do we learn that a person who eats it is also warned? Itkush kodesh lemikdash. He makes a hekesh. Hekesh means that you connect two things. Kodesh lemikdash. He connects something which is sanctified as a korban to the actual place of the mikdash. Just like on the mikdash itself, it's asur and there's a onesh karet. So too is there an onesh karet for someone who touches the food. So therefore, since I have another source, the hekesh, to tell me that halacha, so therefore I have the pasuk of B'kol Kodesh Lo Tiga, that you're not allowed to touch any sacrificial food. I could use it for the azhara of food, which is Kodesh. So let's just review. Resh Lakish is left with, at the end of the day, he does one less pasuk. So therefore, one less pasuk with regards to teruma, with regards to kodashim. So Resh Lakish would hold that if you're tameh and you touch something which is sanctified food, the halacha would be that you get malkut. Rabbi Yohanan, who only has the pasuk for teruma, holds that you only get that malkut if you touch teruma, not for kodashim. Okay? Says the Gemara. 1 second. So you're telling me now that B'chol Kodesh Lo Tiga teaches, according to Rabbi Yohanan, that you can't touch the food of a korban. That's how Resh Lakish learns. All right. Now, that's with regards to malkut. But for karet, it's only when the korban was an official korban. When makes a korban an official korban? Then you started doing the avodah to some degree. Okay, so as an example, let's say I say I'm going to separate this animal for a korban. That doesn't make it a korban yet. The idea of karet only comes once the korban is underway. So they're in the middle of the avodah. They've done at least the minimal element of the avodah. Ve'akati, the Gemara says, lahachi hu da'ata. 1 second. You want to tell me that that's what it's coming to teach you? Hahu mebayle letameh she'achal basar kodesh lifnei zerikat damim. 1 second. Resh Lakish You're telling me that that's what you're using it for. Don't you need this pasuk? We use already this pasuk to tell you that if a person is tameh that eats from the meat of a korban before they managed to throw the blood in the mizbeach. So remember, that part of the avodah is that they take the blood that they take from the korban and it goes to the mizbeach. They put it on the mizbeach. How they put it, where they put it, depends on korban to korban. But until you do the zrika, the animal, the korban is not yet considered a full-fledged korban. So the Gemara says, we use this pasuk to tell you that that's only when the korban is already underway, that at that point.
She's not touching the korban then.
What do you mean?
She's not in the Beit HaMikdash doing, touching things.
No. Remember, there's the blood would go inside. But now I'm here bringing my korban. As an example, let's say a woman is there, she's in her 33 days, but it's Pesach, so everyone is here.
She's bringing her own korban.
The family's bringing korban.
But she's not.
Now they're bringing the food out for people to eat. Because they would eat the food of the
They can't do that
korbanot.
unless they do the zerika, right?
So they did the zerika, but they brought it out, but they're not yet finished with the korban. Or they finished doing everything for the korban, they brought it out, she doesn't realize, and she touches the thing, or she eats the item, okay? So the Gemara says, but only after the zerikat damim, that's when this halacha is relevant. So the Gemara says, since he needs this pasuk to tell you that you're obligated and you get malkut even before zerikat damim, that you get malkut even for before the zerika. You just get karet after the zerika. The Gemara says, someone eats Resh Lakish, Omer Loke. Resh Lakish says, you still get malkut. Yohanan says, Eno Loke, you do not get malkut. Resh Lakish, Omer Loke, why? Because he learns the pasuk, anything which is kodesh, lo tiga. Lo shna lefnei zrika, lo shna le'achar zrika. Since it's sanctified, it's set aside as a korban, even if it's not yet a completed korban, I still get lashes. That's how Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shakish learns. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, eno loke. Rabbi Yochanan l'taimeh. Rabbi Yochanan follows what we said earlier. Te'amar kara timato tumato. We learn out gzera shava on eating kodashim to entering the kodesh. When do we find tumato bo? It's talking about after the zerika of the korban. And how do we know that it's talking about after the zerika of the korban? Because it refers to it as the korban. Right? It talks about the shilamim, and it says kol tahar yochal basar, exactly like you said. At what point am I allowed to eat from it? Only after the korban is completed. So if it tells you that a person who's pure can eat it, and then it tells you that a person who's tameh can't touch it or can't eat it, with the place that you're referring to is a place where a tahor person could already eat it. That means it's after zerika. So Rabbi Yohanan says, I only have a pasuk that tells you this with regards to post zerika. So therefore, I can't tell you that you get malkut before that point. Resh Lakish says, no, I don't learn it from there. So I don't have that problem of tumato. For me, it only says, bechol kodesh lo tiga. Is it kodesh now? Yes, it was kodesh even before the zerika. It just wasn't a completed korban. So Rabbi Yohanan would hold that you get lashes. So if that's the case, it's the Gemara, right? So it turns out that Resh Lakish has the same pasuk. He's using it for another item. And every time you've used it for something else, you can't now tell me that you're using it to tell me this, which is the actual onesh, the azhara itself. So if that's the case, the Gemara says, Hahi mibechol kodesh nafka. No. So Resh Lakish, you know what? You want to know where he learns? That pre-zerika, you could get malkut for eating or touching the meat before zerika. Where does he get it from? He learns that from bechol kodesh lo tiga. He learns it also from that same pasuk, but not the one that we're trying to use here. So therefore, that will give us a isur for a person who's tameh to eat korban after the
word bechol is extra.
Yes, and it tells you, and that will include, and that will give you post zerika karet, and you still have pre zerika malkut. The Gemara says, okay, so who do we hold like in this machloket of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish? Tanya kavate de Reish Lakish. Let's learn a bright according to Reish Lakish. Chol kodesh lo tiga azara leochel. When the pasuk says b'chol kodesh lo tiga, what does that tell you? That's a warning leochel to someone who's eating. Ata omer azara leochel. That tells you want to tell me that pasuk is coming to tell you that a person is not allowed to eat from kodashim while he's tameh. O eno ela azara lenogea. How do I know? Maybe it's a warning only for someone who touches, but not for someone who eats. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "B'chol kodesh lo tiga, ve'el mikdash lo tavo." Makish kodesh lemikdash. We have a hekesh from kodesh lemikdash. Why? Ma mikdash davar sheyesh bo netilat neshama. Just like when it comes to the mikdash, we refer to something that has an onesh karet. So too, so too, also with regards to Chol Kodesh Lo Tiga, it's coming to tell you something that also has an isur of karet. But there's no isur karet for someone who touches. So therefore, it must be referring to someone who's eating. There's never a isur of karet for touching. It was only for eating. So Rabbi Yochanan was able to learn the isur. The Braita is able to learn that this warning refers to eating of kodashim. Ela ba'achila. So therefore we have a proof according to Reish Lakish. Now, one second. We learned a specific idea. That any time there's an isur in the Torah, and the Torah tells you, I want to tell you how to fix it. What do we call that? Lav hanitak la'aseh. Remember that? So as an example, let's say a person steals. What does the Torah tell us? How do you fix that situation?
Give it back.
It doesn't say bring a korban. It says give it back. So that's called lav nitak la'aseh. A sin, don't steal, connected to an aseh, a positive commandment to tell you how to fix it. Okay. Says the Gemara, So we learned already, anytime there's a lav nitak la'aseh, you don't give the guy malkut. So the guy stole, you don't give him lashes. You know why? Because the Torah told you how to fix it. We don't need to fix it with lashes. He could fix it by returning the lost object. Okay? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabba Bar Chana said to Rabbi Yochanan, Kol lo ta'aseh, shekidemo aseh. Any lo ta'aseh that's preceded by an aseh, lokin alav, there you could actually get malkut. So 1 minute, let's just review. The Torah says don't steal, but if you steal, return it. So where is the positive commandment? After the negative commandment. Don't steal. If you stole, return it. So the positive commandment follows the negative commandment. In that case, there's no malkut, there's no lashes. Okay? What if the Torah gave you a positive commandment and then followed up with a negative commandment? Says Rabba Bar Chana, in that case, it's not a lav nitak la'aseh. It's not a negative, which was then given a remedy of a positive. It's the other way around. It's a positive commandment not to do that they then gave you a negative. So says Rav Bar Chana, in such a case, when the Torah presented it in that way, that was the way we read about it in the Torah. So it's not that there's a positive solution to a negative commandment. The negative commandment stands on its own. All it is doubling down on not fulfilling the positive commandment. Got it? Says the Gemara, Amru lo, they said to him, Amrit, did you say this halakha? Rabbi Yochanan, you said over this halakha in the name of Rabba Bar Chana? By the way, whenever anyone says that to you, don't all the defenses come down? I didn't say nothing. He said no. Amar Rabba said, Ha'elokim. He swore by Hashem, Yani. Amira, he did say it. Uchtiva v'tanina. Not only did he say it, but it's also written in the Torah, and also Tanina, it's a Mishnah. that is the halacha. Ktiva, it says, v'yishalchu min ha'machaneh, that when someone has tzarat, or when someone is a zav, they send them out of the camp. So is that a negative or positive? Positive. When someone is tameh like this, send him out of the camp. That's a positive commandment. Okay? So, what happens? The next pasuk says, "V'lo yitamu et machanehem," and they should not make the machaneh, the encampment unholy, impure. So in that case, so we find an example of a negative commandment, right? Which is not followed by a positive commandment, but it's preceded by a positive commandment. Is that clear? No, one more time.
Doesn't it follow a positive commandment of telling them to leave?
So the positive commandment is leave.
Yeah.
The negative commandment is, and don't make something unholy. Don't make something impure. Okay? So the positive is followed by the negative. When you have a negative, and then you have the positive is the solution. So you can't come and give me Malkut as a solution when the Torah tells you that this is the solution. But when the Torah said, don't do something like this, then it gave you on top of that a negative commandment. The positive is not being presented as a solution. It's not being presented as a remedy. So therefore, how am I going to remedy it? The same way I remedy every other negative commandment.
Boom.
You got it? The logic is very pure. Says the Gemara, Tanina, not only do we have a pasuk that offers that scenario, Tanina, we also have a Mishnah. Habal mikdash tameh, someone comes to the mikdash tameh, right? We learned about this in the Mishnah, that person he gets Malkut, but we also know that before he entered the mikdash, like the pasuk said, we know that he had a positive commandment to leave the encampment. So the case of the Mishnah that tells you that someone who comes tameh into the mikdash is that very case. Because how did we structure that in the pasuk? You should be sent out of the encampment. And now what happens if you come into the encampment? You get Malkut. So you see the Mishnah itself tells you that a negative commandment which precedes a positive commandment still gets Malkut. One second, if that's the case, why did Rabbi Yohanan pull back when they asked him, did you really say this? Not only did he say it according to Rabbah, he said it, and there's a proof in the Pasuk, and there's a proof in the Mishnah. Gemara says, because Rabbi Yochanan had a problem. What's the case that he had a problem? He had a problem by honest. The Tanya, the Braita says, honest, someone who rapes a woman, shegerash, who then divorces what's it called? The victim of the honest. What's the case? What do you mean divorces? How is he honest? The answer is like this. If someone is honest, he rapes a woman, he finds some virgin and he rapes her. Torah says he has to marry her. Now remember, that's if she wants. In other words, if she says, well, I'm damaged goods now, no one's going to take me, we force him to marry her, if she wants. The Pasuk continues and says, Lo yuchal shalcha koyamav, and he can never divorce her.
Right, because you undo the rape.
Yeah, what do you do? Yeah, exactly.
You undo the remedy.
So the halacha is, you're not allowed to ever send her away. So what happens now? The guy, he don't listen. He went out, got a get, gave it to his wife. Ones shegiresh. So he broke the negative commandment of Lo yuchal shalcha koyamav. Im Yisrael, if he's Yisrael, machzir ve'eno lokeh. Okay, you just force him to get remarried. Im Kohen, what if he's a Kohen? Lokeh ve'eno machzir. The halacha is that a Kohen is not allowed to marry someone who's divorced. So if he divorces this woman,
he can't marry her again.
He can't remarry her because she's a divorcee. Who's divorcee? His divorcee. But she's a divorcee.
Isn't it undoing an act versus?
So one second, we didn't get to the punchline yet.
Okay.
So the Braita tells us that in this case of a onesh shegiresh, the halacha is if he's Yisrael, machzir ve'eno lokeh. If he's a Kohen, so he's not allowed to remarry her. Lokeh ve'eno machzir. He gets Malkut, but doesn't take her back. Now, what is the problem? Im Yisrael hu machzir ve'eno lokeh amai. If he's Yisrael, he takes her back, but he does not get Malkut. Why? Lo ta'aseh shekidmo asehu. This lo ta'aseh, so what's the reason why you would imagine that Israel does not get Malkut if he takes her back after his get? Because
It's a positive commandment.
it's a positive commandment, that is an option, is a remedy to a negative commandment, right?
Theoretically.
Says the Gemara. So what's the why is that over here it says he has to marry her. Lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. Right?
It says it has to marry her after he raped her, not after he divorced her.
So look at the pasuk, okay? Ve'anshu oto mea kesef. They give him a fine of 100 silver pieces. Ve'natenu le'avya na'ara, and he pays this fine to the woman's father. Ki hotzi shemra. Oh, excuse me, that's hotzi shemra. 1 second, that's not the pasuk. Oh yeah, excuse me. Yes, it is. Shotzi shemra betulat Israel. Ve'lo tiyeh li'isha, and to him she shall be as a wife. Lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yamav. Okay, he can't send her away all the days of his life. So here you have a positive commandment, lo tiyeh li'isha, followed by a negative commandment, you can't send her away. So it's not like don't steal, and if you steal, return. It's you must marry her, and and you're not allowed to divorce her. So what happens now? He divorced her. He's now it's a positive commandment followed by a negative commandment. So why does the Israel get off the hook by remarrying her? He should get malkut for transgressing the lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav v'lilki es the Gemara. So the Gemara says Rabbi Yochanan did not have an answer to ones. So therefore, when they asked him if he said it, if he holds that way, Rabbi Yochanan said, I don't. Not because he disagreed with the concept, but because he knew that there's a question that he doesn't have an answer to.
But why can't he just exclude ones?
Because you'd have to explain why ones is excluded.
Is that the only thing that's excluded?
The only one the Gemara brings. Okay? Now, says the Gemara, exactly what we're talking about. Okay? Amar Ula says, hold on, Rabbi Yochanan. We're not done yet. Lo yomar, lo tiyeh le'isha be'ones. Okay? V'ligmer mimotzi shemra. 1 second. The Torah does not have to say that lo tiyeh le'isha, right, when there's a situation of rape. Why? V'ligmer mimotzi shemra. When the pasuk says by motzi shemra that a woman, someone who spreads a rumor that this woman who he married, he said, this girl that you married off to me, I found her, she'd been slept with already. The halacha over there is that he's not allowed to divorce, he has to marry, he stay married to her, okay? So if that's the case with an allegation, how much more so is that the case over here? By motzi shemra, he made an allegation against her that was going to defame her character. We forced him to marry her. How much more so when the defamation of character happened from his own action? The Torah said she has to remain his wife. Ones lo kol sheken. By ones, isn't it 1,000 times more? So therefore, right, we didn't need the pasuk to tell you by ones that she needs to stay married to him, because I could have learned it out from a case of defamation. Lama ne'emar, so why do we bring it down? Why did we say it over here? Im eno inyan lefanav, if it doesn't teach you that you have to marry her, tenehu inyan la'aharav, it must be coming to tell you afterwards. If I don't need it to tell you that he has to marry her, because I know it from the other case with the kal vachomer, like, tenehu inyan la'aharav, learn it for the afterwards. Im gidesh yachzir, that if he divorced her, he has to remarry her. You got it? You got it? One more time. It says by honest that he has to marry her. Rabbi Yochanan has a problem. This is a positive commandment followed by a negative commandment. So, the halacha should be over here, according to the logic that I was putting forth. Halacha should be that she gets lashes. That he gets lashes, Israel. Why doesn't he get lashes? Gemara answers, 1 second. Let's just review. Why did I even need a pasuk by ones? I could have learned out that he has an obligation to marry her. I could have learned it from where? From the case of Motzi Shemra. I could have learned it from there, right? Because if defamation of character requires you to marry her, for sure an act of rape which defames her character by the action you did obligates you to marry her. So therefore, when it tells you marry her over here, what is it telling you? It's not telling you marry her, it's telling you remarry her. So therefore, this pasuk over here is not even referring to marriage. So you want to know why this guy gets malkut? Because this pasuk is not a positive followed by a negative.
So he gets Malkut.
He gets malkut.
But I thought
Yisrael does not get malkut.
Yeah.
The Kohen gets malkut.
okay, the Kohen does, because he can't remarry her. He can't remarry her.
Right.
Yes. So over here in this scenario, the Gemara says why the Yisrael over here he does not get malkut. Why doesn't he get malkut? Right? Why not? The Gemara answers because since we're now learning, Ula is now learning that the pasuk by Ones is telling you that you have to get remarried. So over here, it's not a case of a positive followed by a negative. I already knew the negative from before.
Motzi Shemra.
Exactly. Okay. Hold on a second. The Gemara, 1 second. Ula, I love that you tried to just get Rabbi Yohanan off the hook. Akati Ones Motzi Shemra lo gamar. Your whole thing is built on the fact that you could learn it out from a kal vachomer, okay? From the case of defamation with an action versus defamation with words. The ikal mifrach, you could still undo the kal vachomer. Every kal vachomer, okay? It's only a kal vachomer if there's no pircha. Pircha means a question on the kal vachomer. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you say, listen, I'm in much better shape than this guy, okay? So obviously, if he demands $1 million contract to sign him for your basketball team, I'm in much better shape. So you're obviously going to have to pay me more than $1 million, or at least $1 million. Kal vachomer. From a guy who's in better shape to a guy who's not. Gemara says, Ika lemifrach. 1 second. The guy might be a fat jlub, but the guy has a 99% accuracy on 3-point shooting. I don't even need him to come back down the court. Let him just sit there at the 3-point line for the whole game. So it's true he's not as good shape as you. But there's another thing that makes it be a reason why he's getting paid that $1 million. So your logic to say that this is an obvious upgrade from him is not true. That's what a pircha is on a kal vachomer. So the Gemara says, Ika lemifrach. You're thinking that the case of Ones is much worse than the case of Motzi Shemra. So obviously, if Motzi Shemra, you have to marry her by Ones, and we didn't even need a pasuk to tell it to you. That's why this must be referring to second marriage. Says the Gemara, the Ika lemifrach, ma lemotzi Shemra, sheken lokeh mishalem. By Motzi Shemra, the halacha is, there's something incredibly unique. We've actually come across this before. It's one of the only cases that a person could be lokeh u'mishalem, that you pay the money and you get lashes. Okay? Since that's the case, and when it comes to Ones, the person gets the fine, as we said, of 100 silver coins to the father, but doesn't get lashes, right? As we just said, the Yisrael lo lilki, right? He doesn't get the lashes.
Marries her?
If he marries her and divorces her, he just remarries her. He doesn't get lashes. That's what we just said, right?
Right, but he has to remarry her.
Has to remarry her, but he doesn't have to.
Right.
So the Gemara says, by Motzi Shemra, we see that there's a more severe punishment than here. So you're telling, it's based on the fact that this one is stricter.
Right.
I found a way that one is stricter than you. The Gemara says, okay, hold on. It's not sunk yet. We have a way of saving the situation. Ela lo yomar lo tiye liisha motzi shemra. Let it not say, by motzi shemra, by defamation of character through words, let it not say lo tiye liisha, that he has to marry her. Okay? V'ligmar me Ones. Let it only tell me by Ones lo tiye liisha, that he has to marry her. Since you just told me that motzi shemra is more strict because it has a punishment of lashes and of payment, which you don't usually find, that you get double whammy on the onesh. If you just told me it's stricter, great. So we have 2 pesukim. I'm going to flip you the other way. Let it only say that he has to marry her by actual rape, and I'll learn it to Motzi Shemra, which is more strict because of the 2 punishment scenario. Uma onesh eno lokeh mishalem amar rachmana lo tiyeh leisha. By Ones that you can't get double punishment, no double jeopardy, right? It says that he has to marry her. Motzi Shemra lo kol sheken. Motzi Shemra, isn't it a kol sheken? Kal vachomer. V'lama ne'emar. So why did it say now by Motzi Shemra? Why did it say he has to marry her? If you don't need it to teach you motzi shemra, let it come to teach you something by honest. If you can't use it to tell you lefanav that he has to marry her in the first place, that he has to do it afterwards, that he has to remarry her. So the Gemara is now back. We now have Ula supporting Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, in the case where the negative commandment follows the positive commandment, you get lashes. Rabbi Yochanan didn't want to say it because he has the case of ones, where you see Israel does not get lashes, right? If that's the case, says the Gemara, so Rabbi Yochanan says, I can't say the halakha. Ula says, no, you could say the halakha. You want to know why honest does not get lashes? A very simple reason. Even though this rule generally is true, like you said, honest is an exception. Why? Since by honest, the pasuk says, lo tiyeh li'isha, but it tells you motzi shemra, for sure, 1,000,000%, would have to marry her because it's more strict because of the two punishment law. So that means that the law in motzi shemra, telling you have to marry her, is extra. What's it coming to tell you? It's coming to tell you that you have to remarry her. And if you have to remarry her, so then we have a remedy from the Torah to tell you that the solution is to remarry her. And we learn from Motzi Shemra to Ones. The Gemara says, 1 second, you almost got it. You almost got across the finish line. Umotzi Shemra me Ones nami lo gamar. But if you have that pasuk, right, from Motzi Shemra, right, you can't learn from Ones that you would have to keep her as a wife. It's true that it's stricter in punishment. So therefore, you could learn from Ones to Motzi Shemra. But I could also tell you, now let's go back to our case of the two basketball players. Let's say I tell you, well, this guy, he could hit threes. Obviously, if he's getting paid $1 million, because he could hit threes and he's not in good shape, learn to the other guy. The Gemara says, what do you mean learn to the other guy? The other guy's in better shape, but he can't hit threes. So obviously, you can't learn this way. But the Gemara says, 1 second, each of them has an advantage over the other. So I can't tell you from him to him because of his advantage, and I can't tell you from him to him because of his advantage. So the lessons don't go either way because there's always one reason to knock out a kal vachomer. Neither one of them, kal vachomer means light and heavy. Neither one is light and neither one is heavy because each one has one object over the other. The Gemara says, okay, so I get you. We can't learn one to the ella. The Gemara says, hold on. Lo yomar, let's not use a kal vachomer. Lo yomar lo tiyeh li'isha b'motzi shemra. Let it not say that he has to marry her by motzi shemra. Sharei ishtohi, because by motzi shemra, remember, what's the case of motzi shemra? Let's review the defamation case. The defamation case is the guy marries this woman. The next morning he wakes up and he sees nothing came, no blood. 1 second, you told me that you never were with anybody, that you're a betula, you're a virgin. I see clearly you've been with somebody else. That's Motzi Shemra.
Already married.
Already married.
Oh, okay.
Says the Gemara, over here in Motzi Shemra, Lo tiyeh li'isha doesn't obligate you to marry her. It just obligates you to stay married, not to divorce her. So the Gemara says, Lo yomar lo tiyeh li'isha Motzi Shemra. Why does it say she will be his wife by Motzi Shemra? Harei ishtohi. She's already the wife. Right? So why would you use those words? She should be for you. Lo tiyeh, she should be for you as a wife. Lama ne'emar. There's no reason to say it, right? Not because we're going to learn it to honest because of a kal vachomer, but rather it's extra here because physically, naturally, in the material story, it's not necessary. So therefore, if it's not an inyan for here, learn it to something else, the case of honest. Lama ne'emar, imenu inyan l'motzi shemra, imenu inyan la'onest. Learn it for honest just because it's extra. Imenu inyan lefanav, and if I don't need it to tell you before, because we already have that in the pasuk of honest where it says, Lo tiyeh li'isha, tineu inyan le'acharav. Learn it afterwards. So that's the remedy. So now, Rabbi Yochanan's perfect. Gemara, Ya'eni. Pops up. Ve'ema. Yes, the Gemara. Ve'ema. Let's say, V'menu inyan Lifanav de motzi shemra, tnei unyan lacharav dideh de lo laki. The Gemara says, 1 second. You told me you don't need to tell me she should be for you a wife by motzi shemra, because she's already your wife. So therefore, I'm going to use it for honest. The Gemara says, no. Keep it by motzi shemra. Wow. Keep it by motzi shemra. In the same story, the guy's married. He says that the woman is not that case. What does the pasuk say? We find out that actually the guy's a liar. Sketch. Okay? We find out that the guy's a liar. What do? Says the Gemara, let's make him stay married to her. But he's already married to her. You don't need that pasuk. The Gemara asks, okay, you're right. Use it for after. If he can't divorce her, but if he divorces her, he has to stay married to her. So why did you use it to force the guy to remarry? By a case of rape, use it by the case of defamation. And then what would be the halacha? That motzi shemra, I told you earlier, motzi shemra, you pay and you get whipped. Let's use it in this case for you not to get whipped. By the case of motzi shemra, in which case you would not have the halacha for honest. The Gemara says, en hachinami, great point. I'm with you. This is great. It's true. So motzi shemra, we learn it for afterwards, so therefore it should remove malkut from you by motzi shemra. But once we say it by motzi shemra, we learn it to honest. Okay? Now, why do we learn it to honest? Right? Why do we learn it to honest? So in other words, the Gemara says, you're right. Keep it for you. Keep it in the case of motzi shemra. But once I learned in motzi shemra that after you divorced her, you have to remarry her, and that's the remedy for the isur of not divorcing her. The Gemara says, now I could apply that to honest, and that's why honest doesn't get malkut. The Gemara says, but how are you going to learn it from there? If you're going to learn it from a kal v'chomer, or with a mamatzinu, comparison. If you're going to try and learn it by comparison or by kal v'chomer, you could ask the question we asked before. By motzi shemra, the reason why you're not going to, it's lighter is because you didn't do an action. So even though we just took lashes off the table for motzi shemra, so now it's weaker, okay? But now you could say that motzi shemra, the reason why you don't get lashes is because you didn't do an action. But over here you did an action.
Why isn't speech an action?
So if you remember, we said over there back then, we said, look, we found a case of motzi shemra, which there's no action and still you get malkut. But that was an extreme case, and we had a biblical or scriptural verse explaining that was required. So we learned that earlier, right? We found that example when we learned about requiring an action for malkut. So the Gemara over here says, so now you still have no proof to honest, even if you have a proof by motzi shemra, because motzi shemra was no action and honest was the action. The Gemara says, Ela amar Rava. Rava says, no. Kol yamav be'amod v'hachzer. A honest who gets divorced, forever, he has right, lo yichal shalcha kol yamav. Can't divorce her all his days. So he stands with that same halacha his whole life. Since there's a specific, let me explain. The pasuk gives a negative commandment. You can't divorce her all your days. What is that telling you?
You have to stay married to all your
days. That you need to, exactly. So Rava says that the negative commandment itself has within it a positive commandment. Lo yuchal shachak o yamav means that even if you sent her away, what are you obligated to do now? Not send her away. So it requires you, the very verse itself carries within it the positive remedy. And therefore you don't get malkut by honest. V'chen kiata Ravin, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ravin came and he told Rabbi Yochanan, Kol yamav ba'amod v'hachzer. So therefore Rabbi Yochanan is now reinstated. Even though Rabbi Yochanan had a question from honest, the Gemara brought an answer. And what's the answer? The reason is that in the case of honest, there is a positive commandment remedying the negative commandment. And what is that? That you need to be in a state of not divorcing. Okay. Says the Gemara, this negative commandment is not compared to the lav of hasima. we already explained earlier, right? If you remember that when we had a case of hasima, right? What was the case of hasima? That a person should not muzzle the animal, right? Remember that? So the Gemara asked, and there was where we learned the case of Malkut. And in that prototype, in that initial state of chasima, that was brought in the Torah, there was no positive commandment whatsoever. Like it doesn't say, don't muzzle, and if you do, take it off. There's no positive commandment whatsoever. So maybe the only time you get Malkut is when there's no positive commandment whatsoever. So therefore it's removed from the possibility of Malkut because it has a positive commandment at all. Rava came along and said, remember, that if there's a positive commandment, afterwards we know that there's no Malkut. If there's a positive commandment before, you do get Malkut, correct? That's how we learned it, right? Ask Rav Papa, in the prototype case, where we learn out Malkut in every negative commandment, right? Where do we learn that from? We learn it from a scenario where the animal, where the muzzling has no positive commandment before or after. So how do you know when there's a positive commandment in the vicinity, before or after, you should get Malkut? Maybe we're precluding any positive commandment before or involved, whether it's before or after. Gemara says, Amale Rava told him, Mishum dikatav berachmana aseh yitera migragara. I don't understand you. If the Torah told you that you get Malkut for a negative commandment, why in the world would the fact that the Torah now tells you a positive commandment as well, why would that diminish any logic to give the guy Malkut?
Because we said it's a remedy.
When it's afterwards, it's a remedy. When it's before, it's not a remedy. So you're saying to me it's not like the prototype. You're right. It's like it's better than the prototype. You got it? If it comes after, the Torah is revealing to you, this is how we want you to fix it. When it comes before, the Torah is not telling it to you as a remedy. So why would you think that you should not get Malkut? Because you did two sins. You did a sin that's a negative, and you abandoned a positive commandment. Gemara says, or Papa says, Ihachi, lav shinitak nami. So when you have a remedy too, why should it not be Malkut? Lema, mishum dekata birachmana aseh yitera migragara. Because you had an extra aseh, because you had an extra commandment. Is it worse off? What do you mean? Rabbi says, when it tells it to you after, it's specifically coming to tell you that this is how you solve it. So therefore, you don't get Malkut. When it doesn't come afterwards, it's not giving you a remedy for this situation. Okay? Now, let's see. Should we just finish this last two lines? No, it's going to take us too far.
We've been covering a lot the past 2 times.
You know why? Because since each piece is connected to the piece right after it, anyway you're going to stop, you're going to need to go back and review, right? And if it's a complicated back, forth, so it's hard to stop. But it's okay, because what we can do is we can just go back to the last opinion of Rav Papa and Rava, which deals with the positive commandment and its association with a negative, which helps us understand whether we get Malkut, whether we get Malkut or not. Okay. But Baruch Hashem, I'm happy. It means that we're well on our way.
We really covered a lot. We're going to finish this way before January.
Inshallah.
If we really dedicate.
Inshallah. Okay, boys. Hazal Baruch.